big part of the oral Torah is, of course, the Talmud. And the Talmud is coming to explain in depth the Mishnah. Now, of course, we need to know what's a Mishnah. So we know that when Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah, he got the written Torah and he got the oral Torah. Comes, of course, a question: how do we know in the oral Torah that the oral Torah is from Hashem? I mean, we have the written Torah. There are many, many proofs to show that the Torah is divine, and there's no argument here. For thousands of years, everybody's trying to prove that the Torah is not from Hashem, and there's enough proof that the Torah is divine. It cannot be written by a human being. But how do we know that the oral Torah was given by Hashem? Maybe it's how people say it's man-made, it's the rabbis. And assuming that I'm convinced that it was given by Hashem, how do I know that there's no changes down the line? I mean, Mount Sinai was 3,400 years ago. How do I know that there wasn't some point in time something changed and it was chas v'shalom reformed? So the oral Torah is a little bit of a enigma, a question. Is it true? Is it not true? Many people don't go by it. No, it's rabbinical. It's all sorts of excuses, of course. So when we're looking at the written Torah, which the written Torah is the 5 books of Moses, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and we know that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up on the mountains, he got the written Torah, but at the same time, Hashem explained to him the entire Torah, and that's the oral Torah. And one of the ways how we know that Moshe Rabbeinu got the oral Torah, there is a verse in the Torah. It can be found in the parasha that is called Mishpatim, in the book of Shmot, chapter 24, and it says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, ale elai." Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Come up to me." Where? Hahara, to the mountains. Ve'yeh sham, and you'll be there. Ve'sham etnena lecha et luchot ha'even, and I'm going to give you the tablets. Ve'et haTorah, ve'haTorah, not ve'et haTorah, ve'haTorah, and the Torah. Ve'amitzvah, and the mitzvah, the commandment. Asher katavti lorotechem. This is the verse that says in the Torah. So luchot ha'even, the tablets that we know, that's the 10 commandments. The Torah, that's the written Torah. But the word v'hamitzvah, that's the explanation. Lashon mitzvah comes from the word tzivui, to give a commandment. And that was referring to all the explanations of all the mitzvot. If you're looking at the Torah, the entire Torah is just headlines. It doesn't go into details. I mean, for one example out of many, the Torah tells me about the mitzvah of tefillin, ukshartem leot al yadecha. You should tie it on your hand. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't say which hand. It doesn't say how to tie it. It just says ukshartem leot, just to a sign. Where does it say it has to be a box? And it doesn't say that it has to be, black and square, and I put it here, and how many wraps around the hand? How do I make the tefillin? What do I put in the tefillin? And then it says, you put a sign between your eyes, but I put it here, I put it here, I put it here. What do I put on me? What's that sign? It doesn't say a black box with parchments in it. So here's a classical example that we have a mitzvah from the Torah, what's called a mitzvah deoraita, and the Torah doesn't even tell me how to do it. It just tells me you should have a sign on your hand. And like that, you have numerous examples. For example, it says that we have to have mezuzot on our doors. What's a mezuzah? It doesn't say what's a mezuzah. It just says I have to do uchtavtem al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. Put it on the doorposts and on your gates. But what do I put there? Maybe I put a picture of me, or it doesn't come with explanations. Even, for example, when it's talking about kosher animals, it doesn't tell me the word that I have to slaughter an animal. Doesn't say the word shchita in the Torah. So we see that in many, if not all of the rules, it doesn't really tell me what to do. Some of it is very clear. Lo tignov, don't steal. But even in lo tignov, what's really stealing? Maybe stealing is just money. Maybe taking cattle is not considered stealing. So almost all the mitzvot, there are headlines, because if there was, all the mitzvot would be already written with the explanation in the Torah, you would have an encyclopedia. Who would want to read the Torah? Besides that, there is a question, why didn't Hashem just write it all? Put a tefillin on you, let me tell you what's tefillin and how to do it. So there is one explanation why not to write it, because if it would be written and it would be just given over from generation to generation without an explanation, then any generation will come and read the text and interpret it however they want to interpret it. And not only that, the language changes. For example, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to start learning Gemara, we're going to start learning Mishnayot, we're going to learn Shulchan Aruch. You'll see that the Aramaic and the Lashon Kodesh uses words that we think they're completely different. For example, the word ner in Aramaic, or the biblical way to say ner, is the vessel that holds the oil of a torch. But ner, what we know, ner is a candle. So it's two different things. So one of the many reasons why it was not written is because it has to be explained. And if I will now get a text of an explanation, I will relate to it how it's comfortable for me, not how I want to, not how somebody needs to explain it to me. So the whole Torah is coming to explain the entire Torah. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, now I'm going to explain it to you. Kadosh Baruch Hu is not only giving us rules, he's telling, okay, I'll give you the explanation, how to do it, when to do it. And that's in general the oral Torah, that it came to explain everything. Of course, now we have a different problem, is that there are so many disagreements. This rabbi says this rabbi says that. I mean, we're going to now go through the Gemara and you'll see how many contradictions. Usually how it's working, we'll explain to that in a later stage of the introduction. But the Gemara is coming to explain the Mishnah. Therefore, we'll go through the history that we understand. What's the Gemara? What's the Mishnah? What's the oral? Where does it come from? But we're going to learn a Mishnah. Then the Gemara comes to explain the Mishnah. And there's going to be a lot of arguments. So who do I believe? Maybe I should believe this rabbi. Maybe I should believe that rabbi. So of course there are many, many different rules. But we know that when there's a machloket, when there's an argument, we go by the majority. So if there's going to be one rabbi that pulls to one direction and three rabbis that pulls to the different direction, we go by the majority. And we'll see it in many different places in the Gemara that it says this rabbi says like this and like that, but the Chachamim, the sages, say like that. The halacha will be like the Chachamim.
It's okay to ask you a question? Yeah.
If you don't mind to keep all the questions to the end, that's much better, but you can ask your question. So first of all, we said, how do I know who's right? And we're going to get into more explaining what does it mean, who's right. But when I want to know who do I go by, is that we go by the majority. This is called Achrei Rabim Lehatot, that we see what's the majority of the opinion, and that's what we go by. Now, of course, there's a big question, how do we know that in the last 2,000 years, things weren't changed? I mean, after all, we went through a Spanish Inquisition, we went through a Holocaust, we went through so many different things. How do we know that nothing was changed? So there's many different proofs how nothing was changed. One of them is, if you know, they found the tefillin of Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and they found it in the caves that it called the caves of Qumran, that are very close to the Dead Sea. And they found the tefillin of Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which are identical exactly to how we have it today. I'm talking about a little bit less than 2,000 years ago. But another interesting concept is that there is a teaching in the Torah that it says, Lo tosifu al hadavar velo tigreu. And this is a pasuk from the Torah, can found in the book of Dvarim, in the parasha Va'etchanan. And it means you are not allowed to add anything, and you're not allowed to remove anything. Now you have to understand, when it comes from the original with Moshe Rabbeinu comes to his student, to Yoshua, and he gives it over to him. Now, imagine now, just to give a metaphor, I'm sure you're all familiar with the game. In Hebrew it's called telephone shabur. I think it's called in English the same thing, broken phone. That I will come now to you and I'll say something, and you will pass it to him, and he will pass it to him, and he will pass it to him. Before you know it, it's a completely different thing. So this is, we all know that game. But imagine, take the rule of that game, and I will tell you, this is the word, or the sentence. If you get it right, I give you $100. If you get it wrong, you have to give me $100. So in theory, you would say, whoa, I'm not giving you nothing. I'm going to make sure that I'm saying it exactly identical to him because I want to get the $100. I don't want to get the penalty. And of course with you, and with you, and with you, the same idea. This is kind of how it worked when Moshe Rabbeinu came down and gave the Torah to Yoshua. He told him, listen, these are the rules. You can't add and you can't remove. If you say it exactly, you get a reward. If you start removing, you get a punishment here. So from one generation to other generation, how the Torah was given in such a way, there wasn't a room to mess it up. And one of the proofs you see, 70 years ago, after the Holocaust, millions of Jews gathered in the land of Israel. Some came from Russia, some came from Morocco, some came from Iran, some came from Uzbekistan. Each one came from a whole different place. They all came with the same tefillin. They all came with the same Sefer Torah. They all came with the same tzitzit, with the same way of slaughtering the animal, the same Shabbat, the same family purity. Everything is the same. So this guy maybe puts the tefillin like this and not like that, and this will pronounce the word O instead of ah. There's different changes, but the core is the same. Nothing changed. There's no group that came from France and says, oh no, we do Shabbat a whole different way. It's all the same. I mean, the basic is the same. This is the real proof how you take people that came from completely different places of the universe, and they came with the same thing, with the exact same thing. The same Chanukah, the same Pesach, the same Yom Kippur. It's all the same. So, of course, there are many different proofs that are validating that the oral Torah is also divine. But this is not what we're going to concentrate on. I want to more concentrate on the fact was how it originated. So we're going to go a little bit from the history, is that we know that Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah from Hashem on Har Sinai, and that was in the year 2448 from creation to the world. We're now in the year 5778. And Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah in the year 2448. Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching the Torah for 40 years. Right? 40 years they were walking in the desert. And that's the period it took him to teach them, to give them over the Torah. This is where we learn, by the way. Some people say when it comes to learning Kabbalah, oh no, you have to be 40 years old. The truth is that you have to have 40 years of learning Torah before you start learning Kabbalah. Not 40 years in your passport. But this comes to, that's where they get the concept as what person has to be learned for 40 years, because in the desert it took them 40 years for Moshe Rabbeinu to teach them the Torah. 40 years later was the year 2488 from creation to the world. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah to his student Yoshua. And the way it worked, that Moshe Rabbeinu would come and he would teach Aaron HaKohen and then his sons and then Yoshua and then. But after the 40 years, the Torah, the oral Torah, the authority was given to Yoshua. That was in the year 2488. Yoshua was carrying the authority for 28 years till the year 2516, and of course I'm talking from creation to the world, not the not Jewish calendar. Yoshua gave it to Pinchas, who was a Kohen, and to Eli. They both got the Torah from Yeshua, the oral Torah. Of course, I'm only talking about the oral Torah, and that was in the year 2516. They carried the Torah for 316 years, till the year 2832, and they passed it on to the prophet Shmuel Hanavi.
How could they last? They didn't live that long.
No, not that they lived that long, but that's the periods where it went through, who it went through. So who were the authorities that received the Torah? So at this point, Shmuel Hanavi received the oral Torah. He was the authority that gave it over, because there wasn't books at the time. There wasn't, definitely not videos. There wasn't anything. It was memorized off by heart. So there was an authority. There was the rabbinical authority. So in the year 2832, that's when Shmuel, the prophet, got the Torah, and he got it from Ali HaKohen. Some pronounce his name Ali, some pronounce his name Eli. 51 years, Shmuel Hanavi was the authority that was holding the oral Torah. Shmuel Hanavi passed it on to King David, to David HaMelech. In the year 2883 to creation of the world, which King David was holding the authority, the whole Torah, for 41 years. David HaMelech, who got the Torah, the oral Torah from Shmuel, he passed it on to a group of prophets. And that was 41 years after he received it. Then started a whole period that is called the period of prophets. David HaMelech passed it on to, the first one was Achia Shiloni, who passed it to Eliyahu Navi, to Elijah, who passed it to Elisha, who passed it to Yehoiada, who passed it to Zechariah, who passed it to Hosea, who passed it to Amos. This is a period of prophets. It's called Kufat HaNevi'im. The periods of prophet was about 476 years. From the year 2924 to creation to 3400. And this period is called Kufat HaNevi'im, the period of the prophets. Then started the period that is called Beit Rishon, the first temple. This period is from the year 2928, when the temple was built, till the year 3338, which is 410 years that the first temple was before the first temple was, I can't say alive, but was functioning to 410 years. And this is called the period of the prophets, the first temple. Then in the year 3400 started another period, and the prophets passed it on to a group of people that we call them Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. Excuse me?
Judges?
Not the judges. We call them Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, the men of the Supreme Court.
Sanhedrin?
See what I mean? Not the Sanhedrin, the Knesset HaGdolah. Sanhedrin is a different authority. The Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, this happened already after the destruction of the first temple. The first one who got it was Ezra HaSofer. When he came back to Eretz Israel, he was the authority of the oral Torah. He passed it down to Nehemiah, who passed it down to Daniel, who passed it down to Hillel v'Shammai. We're going to go techev into that period, exactly the hierarchy. But they passed it on to Shmaya and Avtalion. This is the period that is called Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, from the years 3400 from creation to 3788. Then started another period that is called Kufat Beit Sheni, the period of the second temple, that was between 3408 to the year 3828. 420 years that the second temple was standing and operating. Then started the period that is called Kufat HaTanaim, the period of the Tanaim, the sages, which is a little bit before the second temple, and it went for about 160 years. The whole period of the Tanaim, which were the Tanaim, it started with Rabban Gamliel, who passed it on to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was one of the major Tanaim, and he had his students. After the 24,000 students died, the main students that remained was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. And this was the period that is called Kufat HaTanaim. It's marked between the years 3788 for about 160 years till 3948. And one of the Tanaim at the time was called Rabbi Yehuda, who was known as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, is also known as Rabbeinu, as Rebbe, as Rabbi HaKadosh. He's the first one that compiled the oral Torah into books, which those books are called the Mishnah. After that came another period, and this is called the period of Amoraim. This is another period of sages that was going for about 313 years, from the years 3948 till the year 4261. And the dominating Amoraim that we know of, that we're going to read a lot in the Gemara, is Rav Ashi. And then that Rav Ashi actually compiled, and I can't say the word compiled, rather Rav Ashi organized the Talmud. And he was in the period of the Amoraim. Then came another period that is called Kufat HaSavoraim, the period of the Savoraim, which ran for about 113 years, from the years 4236 to the years 4349. And the dominating Saboraim is Rava, and Rava Bar Yosef, Rab Rachumai, Rab Huna. This is a total different period. After that period came another period that is called Kufat HaGeonim, the period of the a Geon is a genius, but it's called the period of the Geonim. This was a very long period for about 451 years, starting from the year 4349 to the year 4800, from creation to the world, of course. And there are many famous Geonim. One of them, the most famous one, is Rabbi Saadia Gaon. There was another few famous one, Rav Shrir Gaon, Rav Yehudai Gaon. But this is a period that is called Kufat HaGeonim. Then started another period that is called the Rishonim. And that ran for about another 475 years, between the years 4800 till the years 5275. We're already getting closer to our generation, which the dominating Rishonim is, of course, Rambam, Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, and Rashi, of course, a commentator, Rabbi Shlomo ben Rabbi Yitzchak, and the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, the Ramban. This is a period that was called Rishonim, which that period went for, like I said, 475 years. Then came another period, that is called the Achronim, the last ones. This period goes for about 500 years, which is entering already our generation, and started at the year 5252 and goes into our generation 5752, which of course in these Achronim, the majority, the famous ones is the Ari HaKadosh, the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Tanya, the Ramak, Gaon from Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, all the way going down to the Ben Ish Chai, to Yosef Karo, of course. I mean, these are the ones that are more close to home. Now, these are the periods, how it started from Moshe Rabbeinu, how it went from generation to generation, all the way up to our generation. Now, we made a very large analogy from Moshe Rabbeinu till now, but mainly we want to concentrate on one period that is most important to us. And this period is called, of course, the period of the Mishnah. Is that from the period of the prophets, that the first one is Shmuel Hanavi, it was brought down from one generation to another generation. And the order was that Shmuel Hanavi gave it to David HaMelech, David HaMelech gave it to Achia Shiloni, Achia Shiloni gave it to Eliyahu Hanavi, to Elijah the prophet, who gave it to Elisha, who gave it to Yehoiada, who passed it on to Zechariah, who passed it on to Hosea, then Amos, then Yeshaya. Yeshaya was the last prophet from that hierarchy, who's the first prophet that started talking about the redemption. He's called Nevi HaGeula, the prophet of the redemption. He passed it on to a group of prophets and sages who are Micha, Yoel, Nahum, and Chavakuk. This is how the generations came down to, who passed it on to Tzefaniah, who passed it to Yirmiyah Hanavi. And Yirmiyahu, he's called the prophet of the destruction, because after they left Yerushalayim, he's the prophet that already told them about the destruction. He's the prophet who told them that they're going to be returning to Israel after that. The prophet of Yirmiyah passed it on to 6 other prophets, who are Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And they passed it on to Mordechai Yehudi, from the famous story of Purim. Mordechai was one of the 120 members of Anshe Knesset Agdolah. When I mentioned these Anshe Knesset Agdolah, it wasn't the Sanhedrin. It was a group of, we can call it the main yeshiva. There was a group of 120 men, and Mordechai was one of them. And just that you understand the level of this man, the least smartest and greater of all 120 spoke 70 languages. That's the level of of a human being. Now, this is where the period really that we need to focus on when it starts, because when we're going to learn the Gemara starts with the Mishnah, and then we're coming to explain the Mishnah. The Gemara is explaining the Mishnah. And we're going to mention a lot of names constantly. So, from Mordechai, of course, the story of Purim, they came back to Eretz Israel. Mordechai gave it to Shimon HaTzadik, who he was one of the last remainings of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah. If you read Masechet Avot, Pirkei Avot, you see in the first chapter, it's talking about it, that Shimon HaTzadik was one of the last remaining from Anshe Knesset Agdolah, and he got the authority from Mordechai, and Shimon HaTzadik started passing it on. The first one who got it was Antignos, Ish Sukkot, who passed it on to a group of pairs. This period is called Tkufat HaZugot, the period of pairs, because in every generation there was a pair of sages. The first pair was Yossi ben Yoezer Yossi ben Yochanan, who passed it on to Yoshua ben Prachya and Netai Arbeli, who passed it on to Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach, who passed it on to Shmaya and Avtalion, who passed it on to the famous Hillel and Shammai. And this is where the period of the Mishnah starts, because they passed it on to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, we're going to hear the name a lot. He's the top generation of the period of the Tanaim, who Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel passed it to his son, who's named after him, and he's Rabban Gamliel. And these are the names that we're going to hear a lot constantly in the Talmud. Rabban Gamliel passed it on to his son, who was also named Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who passed it to his son, which is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is called Rebbe. You'll see a lot in the Talmud, the word, it doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, it will say Rebbe. Rebbe is the sage who's the great-grandson of Rabban Shimon Gamliel. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is the one who compiled the Mishnah. Now what is the Mishnah? They all got it in oral. They passed it on. Just imagine the level of their knowledge that they were able to memorize it all in such a, we barely memorized one Mishnah. They memorized it all and passed it on. Just imagine what level of geniuses they were. So Rebbe, he's the one who compiled all this oral Torah into a series of books that is called the Mishnah. He saw in his Ruach HaKodesh that the generations are getting weaker and weaker, and they're starting to forget, and they're starting to miss all sorts of things, and he said it's time to put it all in writing. And he put it in writing into what's called the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. The acronym that we memorize it's called Zman Nakat, because there are 6 pillars, which are they're called the 6 Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. The acronym is Shas. As you hear it a lot. I'm not talking about the political party. I'm talking about the actual oral Torah. It's called Shas. And the acronym that we said, Zman Nakat, is the names of each one of these Sdarim. The first one is called Zraim, and it's important to know because, again, we're going to start constantly talking about it in the Gemara. The first Sedra is called Zraim, This is the Seder that is talking about all the laws of blessing, of mitzvot, praying, and mainly mitzvot that are dependent on the land of Israel. So the Shemitah and Kilaim and all the rest of the stuff. The next Seder is called Moed. Moed is talking about all the laws of Shabbat, of Yom Tov, and holidays. The third one is called Nashim. The translation is not so important, Nashim is women, but it's talking here about all the laws of Kiddushin, of marriage, and Gitin, which is divorces. The fourth one is called Nezikim, damages. It's talking about all the laws about damage between me and another person. And then the fifth one is called Kodashim, which is talking about, of course, all the sacrifices and all the laws of Beit HaMikdash. And the last one is called Taharot, which is talking about purity and impurity, Tuma and Tahara. All these are called the Shishar Sidrei Mishnah. Each one is divided into Masachtot. There are 60 Masachtot. Each Masechta is divided into a subcategory, and each subcategory has chapters, and each chapter has Mishnayot. That's kind of the structure of the Mishnah. So basically, the difference is that with the Mishnah, then the Gemara, the Mishnah is just headlines. It's not really going into details. It's just going to say a Mishnah is like a short verse, and it's kind of like coded. So if you just memorize the Mishnayot, it doesn't really teach you anything. So what came after the period of the Mishnayot, that, if you remember, we said the beginning of the period of the Tanaim. Later on came the period of the Amoraim, because they received the Mishnah, but nothing was really clear. So you'll see when we're going to learn the Talmud, we learn one Mishnah, and then 30 pages of arguments to explain the Mishnah. What did they really mean? Now, of course, we're gonna do another class tomorrow that sets down the rules of the Talmud. Because just to learn it, I know people that they know Aramaic better than I know Hebrew, but they don't know how to learn the Talmud. You can't just open the book and start learning it. There are rules, there are laws, there's a method how to learn it. It's coded, and it's not so obvious that anyone can just open it and learn it. But first, it's important that we understand what is the Talmud, because we're going to sit now and learn every day, and we're going to break our brains understanding the arguments and the concept. It's called a sugya, an argument. There's a topic is brought up, and now we start dissecting it. Why and how and who, and how do we pull out from that the actual halakha, what's called halakha lemaaseh. So it's important to know the history. We already made a very quick overview about the history. We are going to be concentrating on the period of the Tkufa, the period of the Tanaim, and the period of the Amoraim. That's the entire Gemara. First of all, the Gemara is not time-bound. You're going to see that one rabbi says one thing, and a different rabbi will argue with him. There's going to be a difference of 300 years. It's not that they're sitting in front of each other. When one rabbi comes out with his interpretation, 300 years, a different rabbi says, no, I don't agree with him. And of course, it's going to be bouncing backwards and forth, but it is important that you get some type of an idea of what is the Talmud, where it originated. We're going to do another class, maybe even another two. We're going to have to do at least one class just to lay down the foundation, how to learn the Gemara. For example, the major rule, and I'm sure you say it, you recite it every day when we pray. In most nosachim that we pray, we start the prayer by saying, Rabban Shimon says, "B'shlosha asar midot haTorah nidreshet." That the Torah can be explained in 13 different attributes, or 13 different ways. So we have to learn what are these 13 midot שהתורה נדרשת בהם. And there are different rules that we're going to have to learn. So we're going to take it nice and slow. But for now, just that we get some type of an idea of the history, where it originated from, where it came from, and mainly what it's coming to explain to us. So we have to understand that the oral Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, and it was given over in a coded way. Like if I want to tell you now something, And I don't need you to know everything. I will just tell you a code of the message that I want to give you. It's inside is hidden all the information. So this is in a very broad way what is the Mishnah. Mishnah comes from many different ways to interpret the word Mishnah. One of them comes from the word Mishneh Lamelech. Mishneh Lamelech, Mishneh means the second to. So it's the second to the written Torah. Mishnah also comes from the word in Hebrew leshanen, to repeat, to constantly repeat and repeat and repeat. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Why? Because they used to take Mishnah. I mean, if you call now my 8-year-old or my 11-year-old, they know hundreds of Mishnayot off by heart. They just shoot it like machine gun. They memorize it. Their brain is so sharp at this age, we think that they don't know nothing. Their memory is so fresh, so good and strong, that they just memorize these Mishnayot. They don't even know what it means, but they just spit it out. You should see my 11-year-old now is just like a machine gun. It's unbelievable. So the Mishnah comes from the word in Hebrew, leshanen. Leshanen means to repeat, and to repeat, and to repeat. When you repeat something over and over and over, it gets engraved in your brain. I see from the individuals that were born into the religious world and were growing in yeshiva, and all their life they were memorizing these Mishnayot. They're in their age of 70, they still know it. It's like a song you grew up with when you were young. You never forget the song. I sung it for 5,000 times. So the concept of the Mishnah is the repetition of the oral Torah. But the Mishnah is very condensed, kind of coded, so it's not understandable. Comes the Talmud and it starts dissecting it in a way that it's making what is permissible obvious, what is not permissible. The point of the Gemara is to pull out the actual halacha, the law. But the game in between, that's what makes it fun. Because as we go into the Gemara, then there are different topics, there's different concepts, and then one is depending on the other. It's kind of like a law school. That we're going through some type of a contradiction, an argument, and then comes a different rabbi, comes out of nowhere and says, yeah, but in that tractate, in this case, it was like this and like that, and it really gets you to use your brain in an analytical way. This is not like basic things. You have to have a very strong memory to understand every little detail that came, and the beauty here is that it's all interconnected, literally like a legal case, that at some point one of the rabbis says, okay, I rest my case, you win. And besides revealing the actual halacha, the way how it's revealed is very, very deep, very challenging. And of course in the Talmud here and there there's always these stories and midrashim and agadot. So it's very, very interesting. It definitely makes your brain work. It's a type of topic that you don't just passively understand. That's why I recommended you also get the book and you memorize it. It's good to memorize it with another person or to repeat it, because every day we're going to make a 2-minute recap of the day before, and we're going to continue. But the point is to really understand the Gemara, you're going to have to remember the entire sugya. The sugya is the topic we're talking about. And suddenly one rabbi comes and contradicts, and why is he contradicting? Because he's coming and he's showing you what are the facts that he's basing his contradiction. And you're going to have to start digging into your memory. But that rabbi said this, and this rabbi said that. The point is not to look at it in a negative way and say, they're arguing. That's not the point. The point is to be able to dissect in my analytical mind the cases and where they're bringing it from and where they're bringing their proof from. And there has to be a lot of proofs here. When one rabbi comes and contradicts, he has to bring proof. Is he bringing it from a verse from the Torah? Is he bringing it from a different case? Maybe from a different tractate? So the point is not to focus dafka on the argument, is to focus on the wisdom behind it. Besides that there are such hidden gems in the oral Torah that for us it looks like a very analytical teaching, but inside there's very mystical teachings. And when Mashiach is going to come, he's actually going to start revealing all these mystical teachings in Dafka, in the oral Torah. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to do another class where we're going to lay down the foundation of the basic teachings of the Talmud, that how do I go to start learning. It's not about just reading. Even if you know the Aramaic inside out, you still need to know when to stop, when it's a question, when it's an argument, who's saying what, and there's also rules to the learning. And B'ezrat Hashem, I think we'll do another class that explains a little bit more the idea behind the concept of the entire argument, the backwards and forth.